tasting room, and I wanted to, do something like, fancy, mean something like, show something like, I see something special here, and I want to show her like, I'm kind of serious about this relationship. So we went wine tasting, and immediately I was captivated by the whole ambiance set, the whole storytelling that goes into producing wine and growing the grapes, and it was such a awesome experience to be part of that. But I quickly realized that there's this kind of like perception where I felt that I had to know about wine to really enjoy wine, and that realization happened when someone was pouring. I think it was like a Cab Sauv or maybe a Syrah, and they're saying like, "Oh yeah, you're supposed to taste currants and spice." And in the back of my mind, I'm like, "Man, what is a currant? Like I've never had that. Like I don't even know what it is." And when they're talking about spice, I'm thinking my mom's food, like Indian food, and I was like, there's like this kind of a gap in approachability towards general wine profiles that's as diverse as the people that are drinking the wine, and not a lot of folks kind of understand what currents are. And then even as that first layer hit, then the second layer hit where there wasn't a lot of BIPOC representation, and that was a little bit sad to see, because when I think of celebration and the celebration that's created within the wine tasting rooms, it's rooted in everyone's cultures and background to have that essence of celebration. So that's really, I think at that point, I leaned over to Kai 8 years ago and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if we had like our own thing for our own people? And I think she must have thought that was crazy because that was our first date. And fast forward from 8 years to now, we're married and we're actually, getting our winery started, getting our brand out there. So there's a lot of learnings that are going into it. But that's really how my wine journey started is, 8 years ago when I took Kai to one of our first dates.
Right. So you actually have a personal connection,
Yeah.
with your relationship as well as business interest in wine, which, that's adds a special layer to it as well.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I can share a little bit about myself. It's a little bit similar to Sharon, but a little bit different. So again, my name is Kai, second part of Saanj Winery. And I'm originally from the West Coast and didn't traditionally grow up in wine, but wine has kind of always been around. Um, Kind of unintentionally, my mom's a huge Chardonnay drinker. So I just always remember her having her glass of Chardonnay and me wondering what that is and asking for a glass of it too, even though, couldn't drink as a kid, but like I want a glass of Chardonnay. So that's kind of where my love for wine started as a child. But my background is in human resources. So currently, right now, while also starting up Saanj Winery, I also work at Brooks Sports, which is a running shoe company. It's based over here. So I don't know if we have any runners on the call, but I support that, their HR business partner role. And I would say my love for wine specifically kind of again started with the first date with Sharon. Similar to him, going into that space was just such an immersive experience. Just kind of the level of maturity that you can gain, or just going into a new space, coming out of college where you don't realize there's a whole art to wine and the winemaking process and the different varietals, all different things related to that. And so that's really where my love came from too. And again, similar to Sharon, I think the biggest thing to me was noticing one, we're probably the youngest folks there.
Yeah.
We're also the only people of color there, right? And I think it was just that feeling of not really understanding certain things, or just not really feeling that sense of inclusion, and really feeling out of place and not that sense of belonging in the space. And so to Sharon's point, really just thinking through like, this is a really cool vibe, but like, how can we make it our vibe? How can we
Mhm.
make sure that other people don't have to feel kind of excluded or just in a pretentious space? And so again, similar to Sharon, that's where our love of wine kind of came about, and this journey that we've decided to take to start up our own business 8 years later. So.
That's really interesting because I'm wondering, as you all are telling that story, if because what you describe, not really being well versed in wine in the beginning, and because that can be very intimidating. So for you all to not only um, feel like you want to learn more about wine itself, but also have those vision and thoughts of maybe this might be something we should look into from a business standpoint, you know, it seems like that would be extremely intimidating. So, do you feel like the fact that you all were partnered together and had that same interest together as partners kind of gave you that confidence to say, okay, let's learn about this. Let's look at taking a step forward in this direction that we know nothing about.
Yeah, I definitely say so. I mean, I would say definitely in the beginning, it started off as a vision and a dream, kind of this, I don't want to say la la land, but again, just a kind of almost a far-fetched dream of like, oh, it would be so cool to have our own vineyard, produce our own wine. We could have our own space where, people come in from wherever their background is and to enjoy this wine. And so I think that's where it initially started. But I think really over the years, as we matured, not only in ourselves, but together as a partnership, and eventually a marriage too. Like, I think we've really started to put our heads together to say, actually, like, this might be something viable. And
Mhm.
maybe we should, yeah, like take this seriously. And, I think it also comes down to taking that dream, taking it more seriously, and really creating something for ourselves where we have like a legacy, to be able to say we own this, we created this, and then for future children, things like that, we could be able to pass it off to them, something that has our name on it. So
Yeah, and I would say like totally like 100% like double clicking on what Kai said. Um, I also think like if I think back and I think through our learnings, there's ambiguity in a lot of things, and I think ambiguity exists in almost like quite a bit of aspects within everyone's lives. And when I think of our winery and what really set the course is I look at two things. I look at one, my parents. They immigrated here from Punjab in northern India, northern Pakistan, into the US with nothing in 1984. And then my dad built this landscaping company, and English was like, not his language. He learned it when he came into the US, and seeing my dad and my mom persevere through those challenges, and then even thinking of our challenges that we had within our corporate realm, like it helped us kind of create a little bit of a foundation and framework on
Mhm.
what's important to us and important to creating an authentic experience for our core consumers, and how can we set that as a precedence, meaning like how can we create a legacy that could be something that could be passed along through connections and relationships that we set within our winery. So a lot of that kind of like touches on those elements as well.
Mhm. So it looks like we have a question from the floor. Tahira has a question.
oh, great.
Oh, sorry.
Still gotta learn that mute.
Yeah. Hi, it's nice to meet you. And congratulations on everything. This sounds like really amazing. I was really excited about this event tonight. So one, I just want to say congratulations. And two, I wanted to ask, as pioneers in the space, particularly in Washington, and what you guys are doing is definitely groundbreaking in a lot of ways. Did you did you feel did you receive a lot of like opposition, do you feel, or did you receive a lot of support? And I'm sure that it was terrifying, but how did you feel like you were able to overcome those fears and those kind of like doubts? Because I'm still terrified every day in what I do. So I know, in that isolation over there with, less people who look like you, that has to
Yeah,
definitely be something.
yeah. You want to start it off?
Ooh,
Yeah.
and maybe you should, yeah, and I'll,
Okay.
yeah, it's a
Yeah,
good
yeah.
question.
So, oh gosh, like that's such a great question. And
And give us like the honest, like
yeah,
Absolutely.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
real,
no,
real.
absolutely. I think even now there's a lot of eyebrows raised when we come into a space, um, and that space being the wine industry, because I think a lot of the wine industry, and this is just my opinion, right? It's very traditional.
Mhm.
It's everyone knows everyone kind of deal, and it's great in that aspect where there's this sense of community, but it's hard to kind of break through that community when you're, people of color, when you're brown and black going into a winery industry that's predominantly, white owned, and to some aspect is generational owned, right? Like we've talked to quite a few wineries that are maybe like second generation or third generation owned, and they look at us and question like, oh, well, what are you guys, doing here? And especially like with us being young, that doesn't really help the case either, because then they question whether we've thought through our business overall, and whether we've created that foundation in scaling and keeping a sustainable business. And I think there's a lot of assumptions that are made until folks talk with us, and then we kind of explain like at a high level what we're trying to do and how we're trying to establish our brand and our winery. And I think those are two very different aspects of one, creating a winery, and then second, creating a brand. Because although both of them are directed towards creating a business in general, there's different aspects and different considerations to be made. But I think overall it was a bit of a challenge, right? Because I think there's like 1,033 plus wineries here in Washington State, and of the 1,033, I think there's roughly about 6 or 7 that are Black and Brown owned. So our community is extremely small, and if you compound that with wine bars or wine tasting rooms or even tap rooms, most of those, very few of those are BIPOC owned,
Mhm.
and the ones that are BIPOC owned, we've got a very good sense of community and relationship with them where there's a camaraderie of helping us and supporting us. But I think overall it's a bit of a challenge, I would say, quite honestly.
What about from a consumer standpoint? I mean, are you getting a lot of consumer interest from the Black and Brown community there to feel that support?
I definitely, yeah, I'll chime in a little bit. I definitely think so. I think there's a lot of excitement, especially in our state and in Washington State, where there are fewer of us. It's just exciting to see kind of something that looks familiar to them, but something also where they can either learn from, if they are kind of new wine drinkers, or something where maybe they're more intermediate or advanced and they're like, oh, okay, this is really great to see someone who looks like us kind of building up their wine brand. So I definitely think, kind of going back to hear his question, I think not so much we've seen direct opposition to what we're doing. I think people generally are supportive, but to Sharon's point, like I think people are kind of apprehensive, or there might definitely, you can sense and see and feel that there's some doubts, or maybe they're not taking us seriously. Maybe they're thinking we're not looking at this for the long run, or we're not thinking through things, and maybe this might be a fad or a phase, because with our generation, that's what we're known for, and it's like, yeah, I mean, I think for us is we're trying to take a different approach, to make sure that everyone feels represented, especially generationally, and from their particular background. And so I think mostly we've felt support. It's just, I think we've definitely had some quiet like questioning from people.
Yeah.
Have you all found that there are opportunities for mentorship? Has that opportunity presented itself as you've been networking and getting to know some of the other business owners in the Washington State area? And if so, how did those relationships develop?
Yeah, I can start that off and then Sharon can chime in. I definitely think there's been a lot of opportunities for mentorship, and just really, again, with us having a pretty large wine country here, more over in the Eastern Washington part, or eastern part of the state. I think from a traditionalist aspect, like if you're really trying to hit the ground and just learn everything there is to know about winemaking, different varietal styles, and just really building those connections, I think the mentorship is there. I think personally, and just being transparent, it has been a little bit challenging, I think, to find a mentor, especially from a BIPOC standpoint, or just maybe someone who has, um, who has a different take or a different lens from the traditional ways of outreach or just how you bring people to a space utilizing wine. So I think that's been a little bit of a challenge. And I think in some aspects, we've looked outside of the state to really get more of that inspiration, that innovation, because I think that's a little bit lacking here if I'm being transparent, but definitely the community, everything that we do have in terms of the traditional space and what building those communities, I think is definitely here.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, just very quickly, that folks that we did reach out to during the initial stages of us kind of vetting through our business plan and our idea, they've been very helpful to provide, their learnings as well as some of the challenges that they faced. And I think a lot of it has to do with just a genuine curiosity, like kind of pressing them for questions and showing them that, we're curious and we want to learn about the wine industry. There's a lot of things that we don't know that we're still learning, and having that open-minded communication and that curiosity has definitely helped keep us engaged with some of the folks that we've continued to talk to, as well as providing a lot of great learnings from them as well.
We have a question from Amira.
I'm gonna wait to the end. I just wanted you to know I had a question.
Oh,
I
okay.
can,
Okay.
you fine with me jumping in? So, hi guys, Amira, owner of Lovely Wine. I am I guess what they call a negociant. So I've had a wine brand for about, oh my gosh, 7 years now, but I do not have a
Awesome.
tasting room. So just to give you background on why I'm going to ask what I have to ask, and I have so many questions.
For sure.
The first being because you actually have a winery, right? And I don't. And I just imagine that maybe even harder because of the things you guys are talking about. Like you're in a crowded, space in Washington and you have to stand out. But you also, like me, have a corporate background. I work for Audible, owned by Amazon. So that is my day job, and wine is my passion and love. And I've been growing and trying to scale this brand. So my question is, when you don't have that background, and then you jump out the window and you're like, hey, we're going to start a winery, or like, hey, I'm going to start a wine brand. I am still learning things I wish I knew 7 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago. What do you wish you knew on day one? How long have you had your winery? Sorry, I think I missed that
Oh,
part.
yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. It's brand new. It's like only like 8 months. And
Awesome.
yeah,
Congratulations. So
thank
what
you.
in 8 months do you wish you knew then before you started it?
Ooh,
There's a
geez,
lot.
yeah. I think there's a lot of avenues that they could go into.
You want to start?
You start and then I'll fill in.
What do you wish you knew? And then I have a part B is like, what did you do first? And I'm not talking about LLC and trademark, like literally, what did you do first to say, this is actually a brand and we're going to build this?
Mm.
So sorry, I know that was two parts, but I have so many questions, but I'll leave it there. Two parts.
Yeah,
What do you
yeah.
wish you knew? And what exactly did you do first?
Yeah. I think one thing that I wish we knew uh prior to really going in is honing down on the types of wine that we want to produce, and really having a like some data points to show that these are the types of wines that folks gravitate towards. That's broken out by like BIPOC cohorts. And what I mean by this is, like, there's a lot of wine out there, and a lot of wines that uh might not speak towards like the diverse palettes that a lot of us have, either within our cultural backgrounds or just in general of how we raise. Like, an example that I have of this is that there's a perception, right, that wine pairs well with Italian and French food. Certain wines taste good with steaks and roasted, duck and roasted chicken. But in my household, like, we don't eat like steak like that, like we eat like chickpeas and flatbread. And how does wine pair down to like those types of food? Like, there's a lot of learnings that we went through as we were like, starting up, that I wish we learned prior, is like how do folks from different cultures, different backgrounds relate to the different types of wine? Even though like we have a story of why we chose these wines, like, is there a general tendency for BIPOC cohorts to lean towards wine A versus wine B versus wine C. And that breakdown exists for a lot of like, I would say like white wine consumers, but not a lot for like BIPOC consumers that are coming in. So that's one piece that I wish that we had spent a little bit more time trying to deep dive and understand that aspect. Because when we release our wine and when we share the notes, like we want it to be relatable to folks that might not be eating like Italian or French food, might not be steaks or eating steaks, but are vegetarian. Like, how do those kind of pair to the wine? So I think that's where I'd want to kind of deep dive a little bit more. I wish I had in the past, but I think now learning through it, like those are things that I've considered.
Yeah, no, and I think what I'm thinking is kind of twofold. I know we said like not the trademark stuff or not the kind of the technical aspects behind it, but I think having some of that knowledge of just maybe what to anticipate or expect before getting into it, before getting into the thick of it would have been helpful. Just, just so that we wouldn't have to kind of go back or just kind of do all the extra research or just talking to multiple people to kind of circle around the original plan that we had. So I think that's one thing. I also think for me personally, and I'm doing it now, but I wish I did it earlier, was just really get more of that formal education around wine production specifically and wine pairings, kind of to Shahron's point. I'm currently taking wine production courses right now and just wine technologies, kind of the overall aspect with enology. But I think just as you are starting to talk to different producers and vineyards and wineries, there's so much lingo and everything that we're just not familiar with because we don't know what we don't know. And sometimes that could, there's a lot of learnings there, a lot of research, homework you have to do, especially as we're like building up stuff. So I think that's definitely something that would have been great, to know prior to us kind of diving in.
Yeah. And now, like for your second part of the question, that's a good one. I love that one. And for me, like, so my mind is like very analytical and uh very like qualitative. And when I think of branding, I think of like it's just like super squishy to me. And when we were going through our branding and when we were going through our whole strategy, the two themes that came up is one, intentionality. Like, how do we want to show our brand and how do we want to have our brand have a personality that speaks on both of our personalities that connect to the folks that we want to connect to? And second, like, how is it perceived by our core consumers and who would be our core consumers? And thinking of those two aspects together, intentionality and core consumers, that allowed us to kind of think through it a little bit more holistically on how we want to release our brand and how we want to use like thematic colors, even going down to our logo. There was, gosh, like I swear, like we spent like maybe a whole month and a half going through logo. And I would say like we spent 2 months like thinking of what our mission and vision is because we want to ensure that our intentionality is shown in how we communicate our brand and how we communicate our winery, because that is kind of the framework of how you start to scale your business.
Yeah, and to that point, just to add too, I mean, I think one of the first things was trying to figure out the name that speaks to both of us and really trying not to come up with something that felt too generic or just something that didn't feel like it connected. And hence, where Saanj came about, building that community, uplifting that community, unity, all of those things. And so we spent a lot of time kind of as first steps, just even trying to figure out the name. And I think we kept going back and forth. And like we spent way too much time on that. And then once we figured that out, then again, it was really just honing down on that mission vision. And really the first thought we had is like, okay, like now we really got to create this brand and image of ourselves. And something that'll be sustainable long-term, right? Or something that we can create different iterations of, right? So knowing that it's not going to be perfect outright, or knowing that we might have to shift a little bit and just kind of making sure that it's something that we're constantly proud of and we can stand by and, it's reaching the audience that we wanted to.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We had a follow-up question on the first part of your answer with regards to the data, the consumer data. Someone wanted to know if you had been able to find any resources for that, particularly BIPOC wine consumers.
Yeah. So, oh yeah, this is a really good question, and I like to go deep on
He's
a little bit
deep
data.
in data.
So there's really three sources, right? One is the Silicon Valley Bank consumer report around the grape industry or the wine industry from 2022. That was super helpful because, and I'll answer this in like two forms. So the Silicon Valley Bank report was helpful because what it showed or what it indicated is the traditional wine consumer is being replaced by younger BIPOC consumers that are entering the wine industry. And the younger consumers generally fall in the range between the age group of 30 to 55, where they've got a higher purchasing power than the folks that are like 60 plus and in the white demographic. So there was a little bit of elements in the Silicon Valley Bank that was like really helpful because it focused on what like our core consumers fall into like an age group and then in the BIPOC cohort. So the Silicon Valley Bank provided that holistic view. And then the second part of this was the Census Bureau's report. And in there, it broke down the wine tendencies, or well, not the wine tendency, but the wine demand that's broken up by age and then by groups within the BIPOC cohort. And it's a little bit more of a data element that talks through like why people are gravitating towards wine that are black and brown, that identifies black and brown, that are opting in for the health benefits versus like beer and versus hard liquor. So those two elements, those two data points exist, but it was a mission to like get that because you had to get a contact in the Census Bureau to provide you the full report of that breakout. So we were fortunate enough to find someone to provide that information over. And then the third element here is that we've got the Washington State Wine Commission that has a pretty wide array of data sets that shows like how consumers are trending, where they're trending towards, and how certain types of wine are increasing demand versus the others. So those are kind of like the two themes, but three different data elements that we had to look into to provide a very like end-to-end like business plan process.
Thank you for sharing that information. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great question.
Do you have any resources or advice for some of our members who are looking to have their own brand when it comes to funding and how you go about the financial startup aspect of that?
Oh gosh, yeah. Funding is gonna be like a whole hour long conversation. So maybe we could break that up into like a follow-up session where I could both talk through
Dive
our
deeper.
journey. But
I +1 that follow-up session.
yeah, exactly. I think it'd be great. Maybe what we could do is like we could do this like every quarter, and then we could talk through that process and maybe certain elements. But at a very high level, like the fundraising process, there's really three avenues to that any business would have. One is like going towards investors. Second is going towards like a small business loan or a bank loan, and the third is like going towards like a venture capital firm. And there's different pros and cons for each three of these elements, right? Like with a business loan, you're offsetting it with debt. With investor piece, like, and what I mean by investors, we gravitated towards like angel investors that are providing like seed funding for us to grow as a business. And in any investor realm, they talk through like, they want a percentage of equity of your business, right? Like they want like maybe 10% of equity, which means like 10% ownership stake in the business, or maybe they want like certain dividends or like a certain percentage of your cash flow be paid out to them either on a monthly or yearly basis. So there's a little bit of kind of like an ebb and flow towards the investor piece. And then the third is like venture capitals. And that becomes a little bit of a tricky situation because you are your company or your winery is a portfolio amongst like 30 other companies that they have within this venture capital, and you start to kind of report to them with like, how much sales did you make in a month, like what's your net expense and net profit. So in these three elements, there's pros and cons. We're in the fundraising process right now. We're going towards angel investors, and then we're also going towards a mix of loans as well. And the process in that is it's an endeavor.
Expensive.
Yeah, because not only do you have to have a business plan, you also have to have a pitch deck. And the pitch deck is really like a contemplation of your whole business plan. Like it could be like a 2-year business plan into like 10 slides, where you can only really talk about for 15 minutes. And from there, like they've already made the decision on whether they want to invest in you or not. And it's a little bit of a tricky situation because it's all about storytelling. And I think that's maybe one advantage that a lot of us might have here as we're thinking of our wineries, that we're all great storytellers. And I think it's even like, I keep saying this, but it's rooted in a lot of our culture is storytelling. Like my dad tells amazing stories where I just like kind of fall off my chair and start laughing. My grandpa has told stories, and I think I've picked up on those elements in how I convey our story. And I think there's a lot of like influence around like storytelling that does help paint a picture as you're going towards angel investors. But it's a great question, but it's a multi-answer session where
Yeah.
we should definitely take maybe an hour, and I could go way into detail on that.
Yeah, we'll definitely follow up and do another session because it looks like we've got a lot of good interest in that particular topic. But I just wanted to ask a quick sub question on that topic because I'm wondering, as you're talking about this, did you find in your experience that there was the same level of maybe hesitation and trepidation with some of the investment routes that you went, thinking that you all would not be around long term? Or did you feel the same thing as you did with some of the fellow business owners in the wine community? Or did it seem like, they were interested in investing in you personally and making a connection with you personally first, and then looking at the business?
It's a good question. So when we're talking about like the investment piece, it's like kind of like a mix of the latter part, Natasha, that you had
Okay.
said. It's so one, like it's very important that your personality shows, and
Absolutely.
it's an authentic connection you want to create. um you could go like, you could cast like a wide net and you want to send an email to like 200-300 investors, right?
Mhm.
But there has to be like intentionality in that, and you want folks that are going to be behind you, that are for your mission and for your vision as a winery or as a company in general, right? And elements of that gets communicated with the personality, and then elements of that is communicated by like just general business practice. And what I mean by this is, if there's like one theme that I've learned in how we've kind
In
of
this
formed our
process.
brand and formed our winery, is frugality breeds intention, and intention breeds innovation. And if you carry that theme across and you put that into 3 different categories, and you think of like a goal for your business without any constraints, and I know that's hard, right? Because then you're thinking of like budgetary constraints, you're thinking of like, shoot, is this gonna work? Like, what if it doesn't? Like
Location, yeah.
location, regulatory, but think about your goals as a business without any of those constraints. What would that goal be? And then work backwards from there and start building that framework. And then from there, all the operations and all the tactical that goes into it, being like the technical information, the constraints that you had, will automatically start flowing into that. And those were elements that we played within our pitch deck towards investors that we've reached out to and that we've engaged.
Mhm.
Yeah. Did that make sense to folks? Because I'm kind of like interested to hear what everyone's feedback is on that.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, I would
I
say
think,
it makes sense. Oh, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, as someone who has been self-funded this entire time, but realizing in order to scale, I have to shed some of that and allow other people to come in
Yes.
and invest in my baby. But it's also, and my background is marketing, so storytelling isn't the issue, right? It's this fear that, okay, there's thousands of wineries and thousands of wines, and I can have the best story, but someone's going to come in. What's going to make them really come in and invest? And what is it going to take for me to also want to give up equity if I need to, right? And which I don't
Yeah.
necessarily want to, but that's not a CEO's mindset, right? Like I want to grow. I want everybody to have access to great wine, but the funding part has been scary because, you know, I've had a bad relationship with debt in the past, right? And debt free now, thank the Lord, right? But I
Yeah.
also should not be spending my own personal money that feeds my kids in
Yeah.
my business so much, right? So it's just like that part is just people think I've had this business for 7 years and I've been bootstrapping it. Yes, but that's a whole different world that I actually have been afraid of. But I know I can't grow that way. So that's why I'm like +1 funding because I'm always in that mindset like everyone else is doing it right and everyone else is doing it better and everyone else has the answers. And that may not always be the truth. We need to be transparent because it's not like if everyone else was getting money, there would be black wineries everywhere, right?
Right, this is true.
Yeah. Oh my God. I said this yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah.
There will be
Yeah.
black wineries everywhere. So I know that's not true, but I also know there is space for us all to be transparent because there's room. So I love the funding talk. I also share what I've done so far and but I appreciate your transparency and definitely think there's more room to talk about this because other communities do it. They get money together and we have to
Yeah.
start being honest about things. So that's why I just give you a little more context and I'll stop talking. Like why I was just like, well, what did you do and what did you start? Because no one talks. And then we all make all these mistakes. And then if we just would have sat in a room and said, guys, no, I'm going to still win. What's for me is for me. But you should think about doing this first because that's going to come up. Or do this first. Or don't focus on that. Right? Like for me, I focus on winemaking. I wanted the best wine. I just want nobody to ever say I make bad wine. But that doesn't mean I always make good business choices. Now I'm focused on business, but it's like I'm against what people expect me to be, and where I'm like, no, I'm really scaling for the first time. So not about me. This is your show. I just appreciate these
No,
conversations.
no,
That's all.
no.
That's
Yeah.
all.
This
Well,
is,
that's what's great about the chat because,
yeah.
you know, Amira, what you're saying, and thank you for being transparent and vulnerable enough to share that because sometimes, you know, as business owners in our community, we feel like, you know, we only get one shot. So sometimes we're hesitant to, you know, make these partnerships because we don't always get, you know, 4, 5, 6 opportunities.
Exactly.
So it's
Mhm.
important for us to collectively share our successes, share our failures, you know, all of those things, because why should I make you run around for 6 months to find out something that I already know?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Exactly.
I wanted to touch on that because just again, adding to Sharon's point and to yours, Amir, and thank you
Mhm.
again for sharing that. That's one thing, just going back to the funding that we've noticed in this process
Mm.
is that it's such a almost like a taboo, you know, to talk about some of these things when it comes to funding. Like we talk to many wineries, wine owners, producers, all of those things, and we ask the question blatantly, like, okay, like, could you tell us a little bit about funding or like, how did you fund your business or what did that process look like? And literally, I think every person that we've talked with couldn't give us an answer, or it was very kind of hush hush, like, oh, or, you know, we had some investors, or, you know, oh, we had some, you know, it's generational, you know, we have it in the family, or somebody's retiring, or something like that. Or, you know, they just don't tell you. And to us, that was extremely frustrating because, again, it feels like it's being gatekept, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's like we all started, you know, all of you started somewhere to start your business, whether that started with self-funding or starting with investor, bank, or something, but it's just like we don't have access to that information and people aren't talking about it enough. And to Natasha's point, you know, it has us running around in circles again, just wondering, okay, like, are we doing this right? Or now we need to pivot. Who do we need to reach out to? And
And
it's really,
mistakes in business are expensive.
yeah, super
Mhm.
expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, wine is
Talk
not.
about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Talk
exactly.
about it.
Yeah. It's not, I would say like it's expensive and it's hard to like pivot. Like
Yeah.
using pivot, like the P word is like it's bad,
It's a
right?
bad
Like
thing.
yeah.
yeah, but for us, like coming from the corporate world, like we would say pivot like
All
left
the
and right,
time.
Time, every
and I had to
code.
pivot this, like we had to go around, you know,
Like,
but
oh, we'll need a pivot.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I think like it goes back to like Amira, your point, and Natasha, your point is like you got to be yourselves. We got to be authentic about this, and if we got to pivot, we got to pivot. And if it's an easy pivot that we could be able to like come back from, then by all means let's do it. But if it's like an iteration, then let's talk through it and understand it. And I think like going back to Kai's point that she made earlier, and I'll move on to maybe the next question here, but I think there's a tendency for a lot of folks to like think of a business and have it like 100% perfect, right? Or having it to some degree like well thought of, like no issues, no problems, right? And I go back to like my learnings when I was at previous role with my senior managers and managers, where like he had mentioned something to me like, you know, have this like 60% completed. I was like, what? Like I want to like 100% complete. Like, why would I want it 60%? But that's been like our North Star as we think about our business is like, how do we make sure that this is 60% completed? And the reason why we're fixated on 60% is because as your winery expands, or even as your business expands, you have to think of like iteration, and you have to think about like how scalable is it going to be? And that's the remaining 40%, right? And it's really important for myself to even check that, and folks to check that is like having 60% like completed is kind of the key.
Nice, nice.
Thank you. Can I just say I'm coming to Washington. I'm buying a bottle and we're gonna sit and talk because I want to get all in your
Yeah,
business. And I want y'all to get
yeah.
all in my business and we're gonna get in each other's business.
Yes,
Let's
Okay.
do it.
absolutely.
I like this. I like what's
Love
happening. And I've
that.
never been to Washington State. You're in Washington, right? Did I make that up?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Washington
Yes.
State.
You're in Washington State. So I'm coming.
Yes,
yeah.
we'll be waiting for you. Yep.
It rains over here a lot.
Yeah,
I
be ready
know.
for the rain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only thing.
There's no sunshine here.
I'm coming in the
Before we
summer.
get
Summer
into
is.
the
Okay,
final
the summer, yeah,
questions,
yeah, yeah. We get like 3 months. That's it.
before we get into the final questions, before we have to wrap it up, we had a question whether or not you would be so kind to maybe send some links to some of your resources that you mentioned throughout the chat in a follow-up
Yeah.
email to us later to share with the group. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And let
That
me
was for the
share.
data, right, Natasha? Because I know I had that question. I would love to look
Yes.
at some of those datas. And if you're not familiar with Monique, who does the winery report with Angela McCrae, that's available too. It's more about winery and it's run by a Black woman. I can try to find that for you guys and send that over to you as well, because she did a lot of research about Black winemakers. Anybody know Monique's last name? I am Monique Bell. If you Google her or anything, she did the report. She's really good. So I'm all about exchanging. So I will share that as well too.
That sounds great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Mhm.
and I'm dropping our email address, like our direct email address. So feel free to shoot both of us an email.
Yes.
If you all want to like talk separately, we could set up time, like, and we could go through like our whole learnings. It'll probably be like a 90-minute session, but we'll go through it.
Have a glass of wine, you know, while
Yeah.
we chat through.
Yeah, yeah.
Megan has a question.
Oh yeah, what?
She's ready.
Hey, I'm just drinking water over here.
Trying to get hydrated.
Hi, y'all. My name is Megan. So all of you're talking about great things that I haven't like touched yet, but I like dreamed to touch. Each one of you are touching on different aspects. And I just graduated from medical science program, master's program, and you talk about pivot. This is a total pivot. Like I've been on this journey to medical school, and I really want to get into the passion, into my like true passions of wine and owning a winery eventually, but just baby steps. Like those are just like my big dreams. And I just want to know maybe if each of you will give me like just insights on what to do. You know, this is A to Z, like what does A look like? You know, what should it look like? I just want to get more involved and I want to learn, and I'm very like good with taking notes. So I'm just, if you guys are, you know, able to drop any gems, I'm definitely here with open ears and just wanting to accept whatever it is you have to offer. And thank you for this information, like seriously, because I always say like, if I know the how, like I'm going to do it. So I just don't know how, and I'm just very interested in doing it. So I just want to say that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for
definitely.
sharing. First off,
Of
congrats.
course.
For
Thank
that.
you. I
Yeah.
really appreciate
Um,
that.
and there's nothing wrong with pivoting. I think that's probably the thing you can say for sure. But I'll just share a couple. I think when I think of just, you're really trying to immerse yourself in whatever aspect of wine. I'm not sure if that's production, if that's a sommelier route, if that's an enthusiast, if that's, it could be endless. I think those are things you can kind of tap into. And for me personally, like just because I know that I have a gap that I need to continue to fill and will continue to do that is just around the education piece. So I say like just looking up in your local area of like what classes there are. Like they typically have classes in like community colleges or even just different programs where you can take a class or two to really just kind of give you the basics of things. That's where I'd start. And also too, I think just talking with people. So I think just like we are right now, like I think just learning about your local wine societies and also um, just really talking with other wine business owners, like reaching out to them and just saying, hey, like, I'd love to connect with you sometime. I have a couple of questions around this. And I think people, for the most part, are always flattered to talk about themselves. I think one, and then also talk about their business and just share some gems related to that, depending on what avenue you want to do. So I say those are like the two key things I'd recommend because talking with people is a wealth of knowledge. Like we learned so much. We learned so much from all of you today too. And so I think that would be a good start personally.
Yeah. And I would say like,
Oh,
yeah, maybe just like maybe like one brief sentence is like, just like Kai mentioned, like talking to like other like business owners, because we've never started a business of our own in the past. Like this is our first one, and there's a lot of things that like you get caught up on, and that's like,
so much.
am I going like fast enough in thinking of my business, and am I doing the right things for starting my business? And those two things really don't exist, right? Like it's such like squishy things. And one thing to like keep in mind is as you think about like starting your winery, starting your business, is like what are like what are like three big steps that I need to like think of for a business, and how could I vet that with existing business owners, and just getting on the phone and just being like persistent, like, hey, like I'm thinking about starting my own business in XYZ, and I've got this curiosity, I've got this idea that I really want to talk through to vet to see if it's scalable. You know, do you mind if we set some like 30 minutes to an hour to talk through it? And I think there's a tendency where people think like, oh man, like this is just, like proprietary information. Like, what if they steal it? Like, no one's gonna do that really. Like, it's like uh intellectual property that you're like kind of sharing, and it's shared at such a high level that no one's really gonna like pivot from their business that they've had like for 10 years, say like, oh shoot, like this person came up with this idea, like I'm gonna do that now. Like that's not the case. Like people, just like Kai mentioned, people do like talking about, how they started their journey and providing those resources. And I would say like leverage those as much as you can, and think about just three small themes.
No, and one thing I would add is that literally open up your mouth and talk to people. Be in the rooms and spaces. Like I had a friend that had a mom that had a friend that started making wine during COVID. And I called the guy up and literally said, hey, like I'm interested in learning about wine. Can I be your
Yeah.
apprentice? He didn't even know who my friend was. And he was like, when could you come? I was like, is Thursday good? I drove 90 minutes to York, PA, and a year later,
Yeah.
I launched my wine brand last year. Still looking to get a space in the DC area,
Awesome. Yeah.
Prince George County, but literally volunteering, helping out. Like I only kind of started a wine line because I had 90 bottles of wine that I made, and I was just like, he's like, what are you going to
Awesome.
do? And I was like, well, I guess I'll sell it. Like I got to get a license. Like we need more of us in
Yeah.
there, and it's just like so I'm in that process. Still a bunch more to learn. It's just like there's generational knowledge that people have, and then even in the wine industry in general, technology is changing. The game is changing.
Absolutely.
The buyers are changing. What buyers, like the younger buyers, the millennials, the Gen Z's expectations are changing. So I was thinking on the way driving here is like more and more of us are having more wine spaces. What is another one of why should I, like, what do I add to the industry? And it's just like if the other counterparts like thought like this, there will not be as many white winemakers as well. So like what makes us different than them? Like
Yeah.
we can all add our own different levels to it. I just think like
Gonna
Morgan
preach
said,
what no
talking to each other is just like I definitely want to come down to Washington and learn from you guys because we have a licensing thing. Like it's like our area is by zoning. Like the land you get your license by the land, and the land has to be zoned. I know
Oh,
others,
yeah.
yeah.
I read
So
into that. Yeah.
it's very a little
Yeah.
difficult in like Pennsylvania and stuff like that. So I'm thinking of like
Yeah.
DC and like all that stuff. But I definitely getting up and talking to people, being in this meeting. I think you gotta like asking for help is hard to do, especially like for me. But I think like that the closed mouth doesn't get fed, and just like people have to know. Like I realized that like I gotta be like the hustlers out there on the street, like let people know I'm selling perfume, I'm selling this, I'm selling that. Like I got wine. Can't sell wine, I don't have my license. But just definitely talking to folks and learning. But thank you,
Yeah.
I appreciate it, all of this.
Yeah. No,
Thank
really,
you.
really great points. And one thing that, maybe two things I want to double click on. One, the generational knowledge. I've been talking to Kai about this when we started our journeys. Like, let's document as much as we can. Like, what's our learning? What did we learn from it? How did we learn from it? What made us go towards that? And how did we like kind of put that into our structure? And we've got that all documented. So maybe Natasha, we'll probably have to have like multiple sessions, like just talking through this because we could share in detail about like how we came about those processes and maybe on the regulatory side too, because a lot of that like I've kind of read through and am familiar with a little bit of it, and we've got like a compliance folk that we've been talking to. But yeah, it's there's a lot of red tape, I would say, in the wine world, well, in alcohol in general, but there's a lot of like innovative ideas out there too.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think that for 2024, we should look into. And if you guys have any specific topics that you would like, its own kind of session, please email me and let me know, because this is the kind of information that we want to make sure that we provide the community, things that will be helpful to people. And I love Shahron. I love what you said earlier too. I think it's important, when starting a new business to think about, what are your, not only what are your goals, but what value system do you stand on? What is it that
Yeah.
you want to accomplish through your business? What do you want your business to stand for? Because I think that that's important too when looking for investors and letting them get to know who you are.
Yeah.
They need to know what are the value systems that this business is founded on. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think like I have a few ideas on how we could structure this. Maybe like we could start with themes. Like maybe theme one is intentionality, then theme two is like fundraising and investor piece. So yeah, we'll follow up on that.
yeah. Well, thank you guys again. This was really, really great. We appreciate everyone joining us this evening. The chat was really, really inspiring, very, very knowledgeable. And thank you guys for your engagement and interaction. And Kai and Shahron, thank you as well for being generous with your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Natasha, for giving us the opportunity. And thank you all for joining, asking, engaging questions. And we'd love to just stay connected with all of you, learn about your journeys, just share information, and just, continue to stay in touch. So thank you so much for all your time.
Yep.
And we'll
And
be
I dropped
sending
our
out,
email, so yeah.
yes, we'll be sending out a follow-up email just to make sure that everyone has your contact information, and then to provide those links for those who are interested as well. So
Awesome.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all. Really appreciate this.
Everyone.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank
See you in
you.
Washington.
Yeah, we'll see you.
Until we meet again. Bye,
Yes.
everybody.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.